Hackers behind terrorism attacks in the Flathead demand ransom. Native American groups are looking for more communication with their new Secretary of Interior. And rainfall might be putting a damper on this summer's fire season, but there is still weeks of work to be done.
Powered by the Montana Television Network. This is the 10 o'clock news on KAJ, Montana's news leader.
Good evening, I'm Don Fisher. Authorities are now saying the hacker behind the cyber terror attacks against schools in the Flathead is demanding a ransom to be paid. That's the latest information tonight from Flathead County Sheriff Chuck Curry, who decided to release the ransom letter this afternoon online in order to help parents understand the scope of the threat and the process of the ongoing investigation, which began when the suspect hacked into the Columbia Falls School District computers last week. Curry hopes by releasing the letter it will show people that threats were not real and they were simply a tactic by cyber extortionists to facilitate their demand for money. He also says the group is already known for making other threats across the country and aren't located in the United States. Sheriff Curry said in a release, quote, "We fully understand the concern and fear that has resulted from this cyber attack and want the community to know that the Valley law enforcement agencies feel that there is no threat to the physical safety of our children, and we will continue to work around the clock to bring those responsible to justice and remain fully committed to this investigation, even though we now know the physical threat to our children does not exist," end quote. Also today, parents, students, and community members had the chance to hear from law enforcement and school officials about these recent cyber threats that have shut down classes and school activities across the Flathead Valley. MTN's Jack Ginsberg shows us what concerns parents have before they resume classes tomorrow.
Today, teachers and school officials met with law enforcement for 2 hours prior to a public meeting to discuss how the threats were started, when they started, and what the schools have done to bring safety back to the community. Students will go back to school tomorrow, but many parents had questions about whether the schools were physically safe to come back to.
Has the school been thoroughly checked over from top to bottom, upper curtains, every place else? Yeah. That's all I'm concerned about. I could care less if they hack into my computer.
Columbia Falls Superintendent Steve Bradshaw says every school has been checked, but knows that schools are vulnerable every single day.
So, can I assure you 100% your kids are going to come to school tomorrow and be safe? I can't do that.
However, according to the Columbia Falls Police Chief, Clint Peters, law enforcement believes the attacks are strictly cyber and do not pose a physical threat.
The threat of them coming in and hurting our children is off the table, and that's the point of this meeting, is that it's not there.
Peters often refers to the attacks being done as a group and says they do not think they are living in the nearby area.
The extent of their knowledge of the internet would put them in an extremely small percentage within the state and probably even in this country.
Columbia Falls students and many others across the Flathead Valley will return to classes at normal hours tomorrow with police on campus. In Columbia Falls, Jack Ginsberg, MTN News.
And Kalispell Public School officials say that there will still be law enforcement present on school campuses tomorrow as a safety precaution. And he says staff have prepped age-appropriate discussion materials that will be used at all buildings. And if you still feel uncomfortable sending your child to school tomorrow, you can contact your child's school to excuse the absence. One Dillon area school was evacuated and others were put on lockdown because of guns found in a pair of students' backpacks today. Beaverhead County High School in Dillon was evacuated and the elementary school and middle schools were locked down around 11 a.m. this morning. Dillon Chief of Police Don Guberson says a student reported that 2 other students had guns on them, deeming the incident as a credible threat to the school. The school officials evacuated the high school, while Guberson said a pair of revolvers were found in students' backpacks after the search. No one was injured in the incident, but the 2 juvenile students were detained and could face charges potentially. Officers say officials say all sports, practices, games, after-school programs, and other activities were canceled for today. One man is dead after a weekend shooting in the Mission Valley, prompting a murder investigation. Lake County Sheriff Don Bell says that shortly before 4:30 a.m. on Saturday, they received reports that a man had been shot at the residence south of Pablo on Old Highway 93. Deputies responded and determined that 34-year-old Johnny McKeever had been shot and killed by 28-year-old Ryan Black outside of Black's residence. Both these men are from Pablo. Black is now being held in Lake County Jail on the charge of deliberate homicide, while deputies continue to investigate the case, and McKeever's body has been taken to the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula so an autopsy can be performed. Widespread precipitation has lowered the fire danger to moderate and has provided a much-needed relief for firefighters across western Montana. and more precipitation is on its way as firefighting efforts give way to repairing fire lines and stabilizing burned areas to avoid problems associated with runoff. Because of these favorable conditions, fire managers will rescind Stage 1 and Stage 2 fire restrictions starting early Wednesday morning across the Flathead Indian Reservation and in the Missoula area. With restrictions lifted, campfires are allowed and folks can run internal combustion engines without restrictions. But officials are still asking people to use caution and to never leave a campfire unattended until it is cold to the touch. Open burning season does remain closed until October. And the rain falling across western Montana may be putting a damper on this summer's fire season, but there are still weeks of work to be done. Crews have gone from cutting miles of containment lines across the forest to trying to make it look like they were never there at all. MTN's Augusta McDonald visited one of the lines at Lolo Peak and brings us the details.
150 miles of containment lines were established this summer to hem in the Lolo Peak fire. Where plants and soil were scraped away or torn out, the land is left vulnerable. This is at the ski runs on Lolo Peak, where heavy machinery crews are working to repair lines cut in mid-August by replacing the soil that was scraped away.
The excavator is moving material back into the constructed fire line so that we can avoid erosion problems. We'll construct erosion features such as water bars here, and then we'll actually seed this ground so that it looks like in a year nothing ever happened.
Erosion is a big concern after a wildfire. Crews here are building water bars to direct runoff into the vegetation. Other containment lines are not such an easy fix. Where large machinery ripped out trees to create a fuel break like this one at Rice Ridge, crews have a lot more material to replace.
So if this line had been constructed in open forest and we had to fell trees in order to build it, then we would actually be pulling that material back in on top of this line as well before we come back in and seed it. That would give it a more natural look and appear as if a windfall event had occurred.
Reporting from Lolo Peak, I'm Augusta McDonald for MTN News.
And the Lolo Peak fire is now almost 70% contained, but more crews are arriving to help with these fire suppression repair efforts. The Northwestern Rocky Type 2 Incident Management Team assumed command of the Lolo Peak fire this evening at 6 p.m. And our Montana Wildfire Relief Fund now sits at more than $88,000 and counting. Thank you to everyone who's contributed so far, and remember that our MTN stations will match the first $50,000 of that total. Arthur Blank, the owner of the Mountain Sky Guest Ranch near Livingston, and the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation will match the $50,000 in donations as well. If you haven't donated, it's not too late. Just go to KAJ18.com for more information. And one thing that we have learned is that some of this rain has been helping our fires. And now we're going to bring in meteorologist Russ Thomas for more on that. Russ?
Yeah, the sun did not shine. It was too wet to play, but that's not all. There's more on the way. Let's go ahead and show what we've got as we look at our St. Joseph Medical Center iCam, looking over the Flathead Valley and Flathead Lake. In Polson, again, it was a cloudy day, dreary day out there as well. We look at our radar. Most of the rain that we saw earlier this afternoon and this evening is out of western Montana or moving to the east, but there is more on the way. Another wet one tomorrow, Wednesday, and perhaps even Thursday. Your complete forecast is coming up in just a few minutes.
All right, thank you so much, Russ. And the University of Montana started a 5-day celebration today to recognize American Indian heritage, a gathering that comes as tribes are still getting to know the ins and outs of the Trump administration, and particularly Secretary Ryan Zinke. MTN's Kent Ludson has the story.
I'm also deeply humbled because of the great responsibility the position holds to be the steward of our majestic lands, the champion of our great Indian nations, and the manager and voice of our diverse wildlife.
Whitefish native Ryan Zinke became the first Montanan to hold a presidential cabinet position in March when he was sworn in as President Donald Trump's Secretary of the Department of Interior. More than 200 days into the job, the relationship between some Native Americans and the new administration is not quite yet defined.
Really, kind of the overall trust responsibility and how the administration will engage with tribes still is really yet to be determined because we haven't seen much from the administration yet.
Mills says the major concerns are the federal trust responsibilities, engagement with tribes across the country, social justice concerns, and natural resource issues. Mills added the transfer of management of the National Bison Range to Bureau of Indian Affairs and the protection of Badger 2 medicine for the Blackfeet tribe are just two important issues for local tribes.
Up front, I am an unapologetic admirer of Teddy Roosevelt and believe he had it right when he placed under federal protection millions of our acres of federal lands and set aside much of it as our national forest.
In a draft report from Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, he recommends changes to nearly a dozen national monuments, including decreasing the Bears Ears Monument in Utah. However, Zinke also suggests adding 3 new national monuments, one being Badger II Medicine in East Glacier. These decisions are leaving some Native Americans concerned on where his stance lies.
I think Zinke's been flip-flop. And so I really don't feel like he's trying to protect as he's opening up more and more public lands or changing or basically taking away from monuments that were protected.
Mills said the Obama administration made significant efforts to engage tribes, including the annual tribal leader conferences, adding it's a waiting game to see how the new administration plans to engage with the Indian nations. In Missoula, Kent Lutzen, MTN News.
And tomorrow, the University of Montana will be hosting a traditional regalia show at the Native American Center on campus. And coming up after the break, we'll have this week's wet and rainy forecast. And Hurricane Maria continues to intensify and is now a Category 5 storm with winds topping 160 miles per hour. That and more coming up after the break.